With Jimmy Garoppolo now a Raider, will Las Vegas target a quarterback in the draft? Or perhaps someone else? And who might that be? Let's discuss. Okay, hello and welcome back to Draft Brothers, a Champions Round podcast. I am your host, Jeff Hasley, and I'm joined by my draft brother, Dan Turner. Dan, we're going to talk some Raiders today. You ready?
I'm ready. I'm excited. Let's do this. Got some news.
Yes, and today we have on the show Matt Holder, and he's with the Bleacher Report and the Silver and Black Pride, and he's going to help us understand what the Raiders are going to do, well, what they might do here in the 2023 NFL Draft. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. And like I said, full disclaimer, I'm still trying to figure out what the hell the Raiders are doing over there, so no expert analysis, but I'll give you guys my best gut read on it.
All right. Well, hey, sometimes that's kind of what we need. And a lot of the times That's what we're all about, right? We're speculating and we're throwing out some outcomes that we think might have an actual chance of being true, right? So
Exactly.
All right, let's get to it. All right, so the big news, the Raiders now have signed free agent quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo, and he's again rejoined with Josh McDaniels, who he knew in New England. With this news, are they potentially out of the quarterback race here as far as a top 4 quarterback in the draft? What's your thoughts there, Matt?
Not at all. I mean, I think we kind of all had a feeling this was something like this was going to happen with the way the free agent quarterback had shook out. Like, you look at it, Derek Carr was arguably one of the best free agents available, barring, Lamar Jackson signing somewhere else and actually leaving Baltimore. So I think everyone kind of expected the Raiders to do something like this where they probably get a guy that's a little bit more of a bridge gap and they can still draft somebody. What I will say, it definitely decreases the urgency if they can't get someone that they like in the top 4, if they miss out on maybe Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud. Will Levis, maybe you can throw in that mix too. Then maybe they're a little bit more patient and either wait into the draft in the middle of the rounds and get somebody like Jake Haener or Tanner McKee. Or even wait till next year and draft a quarterback. But I definitely don't think, as far as if those top 3 guys that I first mentioned, if they're available, I think the Raiders will still be definitely an option for them. It just it basically, like I said, it's a stopgap where you get a guy that can be serviceable starter, keep number 17 out wide happy, and then and kind of reevaluate in a year from now or even later on in April and see what your options are.
Okay. That's that's interesting to see what might happen there. And I don't know the answer. Could they go after a quarterback? I think if the right quarterback were to fall to him, like maybe Anthony Richardson, let's just say he falls. Maybe he's the pick for them. Otherwise, I think they're looking elsewhere. And with your background in scouting and knowing these offensive, defensive players, especially in the trenches and such, and also secondary, who would Las Vegas be targeting as a potential non-quarterback pick at 7 and also later in the draft as well?
Yeah, I think one of the guys that comes to mind as far as like non-quarterbacks, a guy that I like a lot is Miles Murphy out of Clemson. The edge isn't necessarily a huge need for the Raiders, but I would argue the Raiders could use 10 defensive players and get Max Crosby some help. They get Chandler Jones. Chandler Jones was pretty disappointing last year. He's still under contract, and obviously he's a guy that you're going to bring back and give him a second chance because that's the type of player he is. And they can also get out of his contract after next year without too much dead cap if they want to. So I think getting a young pass rusher who can, one, maybe be a good complementary piece to your Pro Bowl pass rusher on the other side. And 2, Murphy is big enough where I think he can play on the inside a little bit and maybe take some of the pressure off and where you can put Jones, him, and Crosby out on the field at the same time. And again, that's something that the Raiders really needed last year was some of that interior help in the pass rush department. So I definitely would be a guy that I have circled on my board. On the outside, probably a guy like Devin Witherspoon from Illinois, the cornerback, or maybe a Christian Gonzalez. As we record this now on Monday of free agency, the first day of the free agency frenzy, the Raiders haven't signed a whole lot of the Raiders haven't signed anyone as far as depth goes for the cornerback position, and that's one position where they, 1, need top end talent and 2, need depth. So that's definitely one of the big positions to watch, especially defensively for them.
If you like sports and playing sporting games, download the Champions Round app. Get playing and start winning. And use the promo code DraftBros for a free $10 and check out our newest game mode, Spicy Slips. If you love live sports gaming, the NBA, or you just want some extra action this NFL offseason, come play Spicy Slips. Build a 2 to 5 leg parlay of live props and win big today. Any second round possibilities that you see that could maybe fall to them? What are they at? 30, 38?
38. One guy that I kind of have an eye on. Well, there's two. One guy I think he might be out of range now for the Raiders, unfortunately, and it's one of my guys. So I'm happy he played well as a prospect, which is Jack Campbell, the linebacker out of Iowa. Yeah, he was a guy that for me going into this week, he was a second round grade. He ends up going to Indianapolis and testing through the roof, and I think dispelling a lot of like rumors or a lot of the narratives that were around him, which maybe he's not quite the athlete that you're hoping for at the linebacker position. But then after he weighed in at 6'4" and 250, again, had unbelievable testing numbers. The best way I could sum him up is he's got old school linebacker size with new school linebacker athleticism. So that's kind of why I'm thinking maybe he ends up getting pushed into the first round and maybe he's out of the Raiders' reach. But if he's there in the second round, I definitely think he's an option because that's another spot where the Raiders could use some help. The other guy that I like a lot for them that could be a good project a little bit at linebacker is Drew Sanders out of Arkansas. He's a guy that's similar to Campbell where he's about the same height, 6'4", 6'5", but about 235, so a little bit on the lighter side. Originally was at Bama, and Bama played him as an edge rusher, transfers to Arkansas, and had a really good year, was one of the finalists for the Butt Kiss Awards in his first year as an off-ball linebacker. Definitely a really good athlete. I think out of high school, if I'm remembering correctly, he was actually the number 1 ranked athlete, and then obviously played some defensive line at Bama, like I just said. So definitely a guy that is very intriguing, can be good in coverage, has some work to do against as a run defender, but another guy that, as we see the shift in that position in the NFL to going towards those more athletic guys, guy that really fits that profile, and I think would be an awesome pickup for either one of them. For them.
Aha, that's some good info there. He is Matt Holder. He's with the Bleacher Report and Silver and Black Pride, and you can find him on Twitter at mholder95. If you're into like the draft and understanding player prospects and info like that, Matt's your guy. So the Raiders re-signed, or was it a franchise tag? Franchise tag on Josh Jacobs. I think Dan's got a question for you about Jacobs.
Yeah. So, like you said before, you have a litany of like needs throughout the roster, especially on defense. So in your opinion, do you think it was the smartest use of cap space to put the franchise tag on Jacobs? Obviously you guys couldn't come into a long-term deal, but would have been better to maybe use that cap space elsewhere? Or is Jacobs good enough to warrant, allocating that much cap towards him?
Well, I think a big part of it is Josh Jacobs was such a big part of their offense last year that losing that guy would be pretty hard to replace. I mean, they did draft 2 running backs in Zamir White and Britton Brown last year and signed 2 more and Brandon Bolden and Amir Abdullah. All 4 of those guys are coming back next year as Abdullah reached an extension or reached a new contract, I think, last week. And then Bolden was on a 2-year deal. And then obviously the rookies are on 3 or 4 year deals. Mm-hmm. But again, none of those guys really got touches because that's just how great Josh Jacobs was. As far as, as far as the efficiency or cap space and whatnot, I mean, the franchise tag was honestly going to be their best option in that regard because had they reached an extension with Jacobs, it was probably going to be, somewhere in the 13 to maybe $16 million a year range because that's what Christian McCaffrey is at. So the 10 years for $10 million for the 1 year doesn't seem too bad. And again, he was such a big part of their offense that I think it's hard to that it would have been hard to replace. And 2, with them offloading Carr's contract, they had quite a bit of cap space. So I think it was a situation where they could afford to pay a little bit of a premium for Jacobs. And I mean, bring back a guy that was the rushing champ and almost did it by himself last year with their shaky offensive line. So it was definitely something where, I'm definitely on board with. I get weary of paying running backs, but I do like the fact that it is like on a short-term deal and it is under what they would have paid on the open market had they reached a long-term agreement with them. Now it's just the question is, can they build a roster enough to convince him that he should be playing? Because he has hinted at potentially not playing if for the Raiders are not playing under the tag, if they don't, build out the rest of the roster to his liking. And because obviously he does not want to play on 1-year deals in back-to-back years. They gave him the prove it contract last year and he proved it. Now it's time to pay him. So,
yeah. Yeah, plus the franchise tag amount for a running back is what, 10 million something, right?
10 million,
Yeah.
yeah, 10,
Yeah.
10
10
and
million.
change.
So yeah,
Yeah,
he's probably wanting more than 10 million is I guess is what it comes
Exactly.
down to.
Exactly.
And I mean they lost Derek Carr. What lost? I say lost. They released Derek Carr. They weren't going to lose him and Josh Jacobs. That would just be
Right.
horrible
Right.
for the fan base, for the franchise. I got a question here. I want to go off script a little bit here, Matt. I tend to do that, but that's okay.
No worries.
Hopefully that's okay. So you've got Jimmy Garoppolo, right, who is a career 70% win percentage quarterback, right? Which alone is an outstanding stat. From a fantasy sense, how do you see Garoppolo's presence for Devontae Adams, for Darren Waller, and also Jacobs? We'll throw him in there as well. I mean, do you see the needle pointing up for those guys, or down, or about the same?
Well, I think it's going to be pointing down for Devontae just because if you go back and watch the Raiders games, there were points where him and Derek Carr, or Derek Carr was just heaving it up to him. And if you go look at the target shares, like it was very disproportionate to Devontae Adams. Can't say I blame him. There's a reason why that guy's getting as much money as he is and why he's heralded the way he is. So I think definitely from a fantasy perspective, not having that immediate connection with obviously the quarterback not being his best friend, probably going to see Devontae's production slip. But I think a guy like Waller, granted, Waller's got to stay healthy too, as he's struggled to do over the last 2 years. And even Jacobs I think will benefit a lot from Garoppolo being in there because he's a guy that typically likes to target those short to intermediate areas. We know he doesn't have great arm strength, and that's one of his biggest flaws. So I think that's another reason why Devontae is going to maybe see a little bit of or a decrease in production because him and Derek had a really good connection on those go balls a lot of times last year. But one guy that you didn't mention that I kind of want to bring up that I think will definitely have the arrow pointed upward is Hunter Renfrow. Because like I said, Hunter Renfrow, very similar to what Garoppolo had in Ayuk and Deebo Samuel as a guy that can operate out of the slot and again win in those short to intermediate areas and is good after the catch. So I think that could be definitely a part where we see Renfrow's numbers go back up. And again, he's got to stay healthy too, as that was one of the problems with the Raiders offense last year.
So do you think that last year's lack of production from Renfrow, granted he did get hurt, but his lack of production compared to 2021, was that a result of Carr? Was it a result of McDaniels, the offense, kind of a combination of the two? Or is it the presence of Adams, who was just literally taking everything away?
I'll have to go with the old cop-out answer. It was a combination of all of it in there at once. But yeah, I mean, I think with Renfrow, part of it was even in the beginning of the season, if you guys remember when they played the Cardinals in week 2, he had the costly fumble that ended up costing the game. Yeah, and on that play, he also got a concussion and he missed the next week. Then later he had another injury where he got put on IR. So, I mean, that's 5 games right there that he missed right off the bat, which obviously impacts his production. And 2, I felt like with him, the way Hunter Renfrow throve in Gruden's system is Gruden just basically told him to go out there and get open. Gruden gave him a ton of option routes and let him kind of do whatever he could. And Carr towards the end of their time with Gruden and stuff like that started to figure out where he'd be and was able to guess a little bit better, and they were on a better connection. With McDaniels is a little bit more rigid. McDaniels is a little bit more like, okay, I'd say with the control freak with his offense where I always felt like he never let Hunter Renfrow get loose and run those option routes that he was so lethal at and with Gruden. So I definitely think that played a factor. And then 2, like I was saying with Devontae Adams, it's hard to fault the quarterback that's just peppering that guy with targets and throwing it up whenever he can. So
yeah, that's a very good answer, I think, because it kind of involves everything.
I wish I knew that last year before I drafted him.
Me too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I know, man. And my last question, then I'll let Dan ask one if he has one as well. But getting back to the draft, is there anything in particular that you are concerned about heading into the draft? Like, man, I hope that the Raiders get someone at this position, or I hope that they don't take a player at this position. Anything like that? Anything concerning you or worrying you about the upcoming draft?
I'm honestly pretty open to where they're at. I mean, part of that is, like I said, they could draft anybody on defense and I'd be ecstatic about it as long as it's not like a massive reach like we've seen them do in the past with guys like Alex Leatherwood and Damon Arnett and those type of picks. But luckily that was a different regime. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I I don't think the receiver class, one, dictates what a surprising pick where they're at, and two, I don't think they have a big enough need where they'll shock anybody or anything like that. And offensive linemen are always great to have. The one concern I do have that my friends over there on the Raiders side of things do like to tease me with is if the Raiders took like someone like Bijan Robinson or another running back early, just because of what I was talking about with Jacobs. Like you have him, you have 4 other guys that you brought in last season that you're bringing back this year, and you barely used them. That would be like my one concern where I could see them maybe just going with pitching it as the best player available, because Bijan Robinson, don't get me wrong, great prospect. I think he'll be a great pro. It's just putting him on the Raiders when they have so many needs, like I was just talking about on defense, and have needs on the offensive line. That's kind of the one pick that worries me a lot. But for the most part, I'm pretty open to whatever they want to do and whatever they're open or whatever they're looking for. Because again, they have so many needs and could use a ton of players on defense. And I do think there are like a lot of good quality defenders where they'll be picking in this year's draft.
Gotcha. All right, Dan.
So yeah, I do have one more thing. So kind of in the Hunter Renfrow vein. I know he's been injured the past couple of years, but what do you think? How does Garoppolo signing affect Darren Waller?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think Darren Waller can definitely have a bigger year. I think definitely can help him out too, because again, Darren Waller's a guy that does really well in the intermediate areas, and that's where Garoppolo likes to throw. Definitely think he can benefit from him, and again, any more targets that will absolutely help all the rest of the receivers, especially if Waller can, again, stay healthy, because the last 2 years have been pretty ugly for him. I think he's missed about 10 games in the last 2 years off the top of my head. So I definitely think him being able to actually play with Devontae Adams and actually play with Devontae Adams on the field and clear those things out for him will benefit him, as well as playing with an accurate passer like Jimmy G.
All right. Well, very good. We'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. And also thank you, Matt. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your insights on the Raiders. And be sure to follow Matt for all things Raiders and the NFL draft. His Twitter is @mholder95. And for those of you watching here, we appreciate your support. Please do us a favor. If you like the show, give us a like, a subscribe, a comment. That stuff really does help out our channel. And don't forget to download the Champions Round app and use the free $10 bonus code DraftBros. All right, very good. Your entertainment is our passion. We'll see you next time when we talk about the Atlanta Falcons draft.